Welcome to the Foreign Tigers podcast with me, Louis.
And with me, Eric.
For many expats coming from the US, the UK, and other English-speaking countries, their journey in Korea starts and ends with teaching English at private after-school academies called Hagwons.
Honestly, it's a world I'm a little unfamiliar with, but Eric, you've worked in a Hagwon, right?
Indeed, I did. And we're going to learn more about it and what comes after with our guests today.
Awesome. I'm excited to hear from them.
So, people often find that leaving the Hagwon life and embarking in a new career can be extremely challenging. Today's guest not only met that challenge, but now flourishes in her field. Lauren DeMeo is the CEO of the Keys Admissions, a college admissions consultancy supporting students in achieving their educational dreams. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Thanks for joining us today.
No problem. I'm excited to be here.
So diving straight in, tell us about the moment you knew you had to change something in your life and decided to come to Korea.
So, I wouldn't say I had to change something, but I had just graduated college. I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I was trying to get into the US State Department. I had studied abroad in Japan, and when I was in Japan, I went to Korea and I absolutely loved it. And I knew you could teach English in Korea, and so at the end of college, I thought, okay, I'll study for the State Department exam. I'll go to Korea and teach English for a year, and then I'll come back. And so that's what I did. There was not as much thought put into it as there should have been.
Just one of those happy accidents.
Definitely, yeah.
Right.
For sure.
So was it just a linear path though? What were some like the steps that happened along the way though in arriving here? And can you talk more about what that was like and why you ended up settling on Korea?
Um, well, honestly, I was 22. I think if I look back, I really didn't know why I picked Korea. I When I had visited, I just had really felt a strong connection. In Japan, I was really stressed out a lot of the time. I think Japan was a great place to visit, obviously an incredible country, but living there was is very, very hard. And when we came and visited Korea for whatever reason, I just felt very comfortable here. I think people are much warmer, even all the way back in like 2008 when I first came. And so I think that was the main thing. I think I had applied for some other teaching programs. Like I applied for the Princeton in Asia teaching program, um, and Korea was just kind of the easiest thing to go forward with.
So you visited Korea before you signed up to a Hagwon.
Yes. So I had read online, about the options. There's teaching in a public school, which doesn't pay as well, but you have like summers off. And there's teaching in a Hagwon, which generally doesn't require a teaching degree of any kind or even a certificate. And at the time, since I was only planning to come for a year, I thought Hagwon would be the easiest way. So I applied for Hagwon jobs in Daechidong, which is like in Gangnam. So like one of the, notorious sort of areas for Hagwons and academies. And I got lucky enough to start at a Hagwon that was brand new. And the people running it were super, super nice. They kind of gave us everything. They gave us free lunch. They gave us or free dinner. Um, like they were so warm. And the curriculum was really fun. It was like online based curriculum with lots of animations, and you go through stories with the kids and talk to them about it. So I think I just ended up really lucky with the first Hagwon I started at. I had a pretty good head teacher. My coworkers were all pretty chill, really nice. Definitely got lucky with that.
Obviously, coming to move abroad for any expat, that first initial step, it is a very big step. And it means, being far away from friends, family, the life you knew back home. How did your friends and family react when you told them, hey, I'm going to move into Korea and I'm going to be teaching there and maybe for a long time?
Well, I think, part of it was, like, having just graduated college, but at least the people I grew up with, everybody was moving other places. They were moving, to New York, to DC, to Boston. There was no one, like, staying in the hometown. That wasn't, like, a big issue. Since I had already been abroad, and I wanted to be in the State Department, my parents were okay with me going, and it did make sense, like, at the time as, like, a good career step, thought it would add to my experience, that I could, parlay it into something else. But there wasn't really a big issue at the time. And in terms of my own perspective on it, I um I think I have a high risk tolerance that I am not aware of. So a lot of people would ask me, "Oh my gosh, that's so brave. Like, how could you think to do that?" And it just kind of never crossed my mind that it would be hard. So yeah, it wasn't a big deal for me.
So when you first arrived, can you remember a moment when you thought, "Oh, wow, like I've really left home now"?
Yeah. So that being said, not thinking it was a big deal to go is contrast with when I got here. Like, obviously everything was like a huge culture shock. I think I the thing I remember most from first getting here was my neighborhood was what I now know to be like a nice little residential area with lots of villas in Gangnam. But at the time, I think it was like 5 in the morning and it was empty and it was kind of creepy and I couldn't read anything because I couldn't read Korean at the time. Um, and I remember the food was so spicy, even though I love spicy food. Like, at the time, it was like beyond difficult to eat. Like, Korea has changed a lot, but in 2010, it was a lot more difficult to like understand the city, understand just like the culture here. Um, but having been in Japan before, I still think that Korea felt a lot easier to navigate than Tokyo did.
That's interesting. So, like, do you feel like living or being in Tokyo kind of gave you a head start?
Yes, yeah, actually, so Tokyo was so overwhelming because my first place in Asia, I had been studying Japanese, so I thought I would be fine. Um, I think a lot of Westerners think Japan is like, the most polished or most developed, country in Asia, but it's also very closed as a culture. So um, for for me, it's very important to try to assimilate when I live anywhere. I don't wanna be disrespectful. I don't wanna, wear something that people would find offensive or, like, draw attention to myself. I'm trying to blend in as much as I can, even though I know I don't look like anybody else. Um, and in Japan, I just felt like that was, like, very impossible to do because something about the way people hold themselves back there just meant that I always felt out of place, like I was doing the wrong thing all the time. And something about Korea, I feel like, yes, there's a really intense social structure and social rules, but there's also like a little bit more room for expression. There's a lot of like kind people underneath what might be perceived as coldness, and a lot more like real emotion than you would get in Japan.
Hmm. So you talked about feeling warm in Korea. So I kind of and like this just feeling closer to the culture, like pretty quickly, right? Adapting much quicker. I want to ask the opposite question. So not, wow, I've really left home, but what was the moment when you said, wow, I've really found a home?
I mean, I've been abroad for 15 years. I'm very old. And because of that, I don't I think my home is my friends. When I look back at the friends that I made in Korea, even that first year, one of my best friends, if not my best friend, I met her at working at that Hagwon that first year in Korea, and we're still friends like 16 years later. Um, and I, I still keep in touch with most of my best friends that I made over the years. And when I look back at that, at like thinking of Asia as home or Korea as home, part of it is, like, just feeling happy when I go outside. I'm happy to be in this environment. I'm happy to be in this vibrant city with these cool mountains. Like, something about the city just makes me super happy. But the other big part is, like, having your community of friends that, you know, you've known for years and years and are with you no matter what country you live in, that you're still friends. You can still always hang out when you go visit them and they're wherever they've moved to.
I like that. Sometimes I think about my friends back home, and I think we're really fortunate to live in a time when they're just a phone call or a FaceTime away.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned about your kind of you feel at home where your friends are, but if a friend from way back home, your previous home, were to visit you here in Korea for only one day and night, what would your ideal tour be?
I'm lucky enough that my friends from all the way back my hometown actually have visited me, some multiple times in the different countries I've lived in, which is very, very cool. Um, Korea is very hard to do in one single day, but if we were like super motivated and, very caffeinated and ready to walk a lot, I would say we pretty much can only do Seoul. So I would start in Seongsu, then go look at the Han River because it would be close to that. Then come over to Shinbang because I think that's a really cool mix of like old and new Seoul. Then over to DDP, the Dongdaemun Design Plaza, just to kind of check out again a mix of old and new Seoul. Then lunch or dinner in Ujiro Samga, which is a place that has it used to be warehouses, but now has lots of amazing restaurants and bars. And then if we're going for nightlife, if I'm the age I am out now, we would go to Itaewon. If I was 21 and allowed to go to the clubs in Hongdae, I would take my friend to Hongdae. But I would say that would be my ideal, like full 24 hours and in Seoul.
Going back to your experience at Hagwons, as a reader of the Korean related subreddits, it's pretty easy to get the impression that working at a Hagwon is awful. So, are the stories true? Without libeling anyone, is this something that you can, like, do you have any horror stories from your own experience or some other experiences that you can talk about?
I think Hagwon's like any company, it's like very hit or miss. They definitely get a bad reputation, but you can have a bad experience or a good experience kind of anywhere you work. I think what I would advise, like, I definitely have friends who've had really bad experiences. Luckily, I haven't had anything bad. I think knowing your rights and being confident enough to like fight for yourself or get out of a bad situation. If they're not paying you, you should leave. Like kind of things like that that a lot of younger people kind of get nervous about. They get worried they might be deported. I don't think that's actually as big of a risk as people are afraid it is. That's one of the big things that I've noticed with like my younger friends. Like don't be afraid of the system. Like you're not going to get deported. Like just get out of a bad situation if you're in a bad situation. For me, like, the advice I got that I think still applies even back then is, like, go for a company that is pretty established, like a very with a big name. Those, again, you can have a bad experience, but at least for someone like me who had literally no teaching experience when I came to Korea, they have a very structured curriculum, and you just have to follow the curriculum, like, you know, like do it in the right amount of time for the class and you're good to go. And for someone like me who really likes that kind of structure, like these established hagwons are a better fit than the ones where you have to design your own curriculum and hang out with kindergartners and come up with your own things to do with them. But what I think the real like underrated hagwon horror stories are is your coworkers because there are a lot of weird people that you can meet working at hagwons and my horror stories have more to do with the coworkers than anything the Hagwon itself did to me.
Okay, you can't just leave it there. I need to know more. What do you mean?
I had a coworker once who, decided she just stopped answering her parents' messages and phone calls and emails and everything, and her sister contacted me on, Facebook and was like, "Is she okay? We haven't heard from her in weeks. We're so worried." And I went to school and I I talked to my coworker and I was like, "Hey, like your sister really wants to talk to you. Like they're really worried about you." And she was like, um, "Sorry, is that like inconveniencing you?" I was like, "Yes, you are inconveniencing me because your parents think you're dead and they're coming to me to make sure that you're alive." It's just kind of weird
Oh,
things like that will happen over the years
that
in
sounds
Korea.
stressful. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
a burden to be put on you. like, what a crazy responsibility. My goodness.
Yeah. And she had
And
no,
just
gratitude for what I did for her.
And just to be clear, you didn't like this wasn't your friend, it was just a colleague.
Yeah, just a colleague. Yeah.
Wow. You're being deputized in their family troubles there. Okay, so no
Yeah,
real
and
horror stories about the company. What then, on the flip side of that, what was one of the most rewarding experiences you had at Hagwon?
So for me, I started out teaching little kids mostly, like elementary and middle school. And then I ended up teaching SAT prep. And that was kind of a big change for me. That was probably the light bulb moment because I love the high schoolers. I love talking to the older kids. They're so fun. They have so many ideas. They are so excited about life. Like teenagers are hyped about life. They've experienced nothing, so everything is new and awesome to them. So for me, moving on to teach the SAT, even though that was still like a really regimented curriculum, it was something that I really understood, and helping those kids, go through these intensive summer programs where they just studied SAT all day and still trying to make it fun for them and connect with them. That for me was like kind of the light bulb moment for that. I was like, okay, I actually do like working in education, and I really like working with high school students.
So, is there any particular student or class that, like, or specific memory when you're teaching SAT prep that really, solidified this realization that you like education and that this is, a field for you?
So I used to teach these summer intensive programs where we'd be in class from like 9 to 12. We have a 1 hour lunch break, and then we do SAT again from like 12 to 5. And you're in the class with the same kids for, 5 days a week for 8 hours a day. So you build a really strong community with those kids. You get to know them really well. And you have to like, you just have to make it fun and also make sure that they're learning. And something about that I really enjoyed. So at the end of some of those sessions, like some classes we would have really bonded. They would like make me stuff, make me like a drawing or like try to add me on Facebook, which was not allowed, things like that. Um, and it's cool to see. It was cool to like see those bonds form among the students over the course of the summer, and then also like have the bond as a class at the same time. That was pretty rewarding, despite the fact that, the material itself was dry and they did not wanna be there. It was still really fun.
So what uh just to help give a bit more like context to the class situation, like what was your schedule? Like were you a nighttime Hagwon? I know that some, purely at night, some are like weekend. I'm a complete newbie, so could you help me out?
Yeah, the basic couple of Hagwon schedules are either the morning kindergarten schedule, so like 9 to 5, and then the one I did, which I highly recommend for someone who can't wake up early, is like 1 to 9 or 2 to 8, depending. That's what I did in my first year. And I found that to be just amazing because in Korea, it's 24 hours. So at 8 o'clock, you can go out, you have dinner, everything is still open. And then even in the next day, you could get up early and go shopping. You could go to a cafe. You can do stuff before your class starts at 1. So I found this like 1 to 9, 2 to 8 schedule to be really, really awesome, for my first year in Korea. Later on, I was teaching different versions of that schedule. And sometimes I'd teach on Saturdays. But then I'd make more money because I taught on Saturdays too. So the basic normal schedule that you get is either the morning or the evening. I recommend the afternoon evening, but both work for everybody.
It sounds to me like you found a job that was satisfying. You had a schedule you liked. You really enjoyed teaching your students at this SAT prep academy. But of course, we're not just talking to you about Hagwons. We're talking to you because you run your own business. So, at what point, what made you realize that you needed to change your career?
So it wasn't even just the job that I enjoyed, but I was living in Busan. I was having the best time ever. Like I was on the beach all the time on the weekends after work. Um, I had great friends. I had a great community. But the thing is, when I sort of looked around at everyone else, who had been there for like many, many years in Busan as teachers, as English teachers, like you kind of see that there is no career progression. Like you say as a Hagwon teacher, you get an extra 100,000 won a year. That's your pay raise. And even if you were to become like the head teacher, there's just nowhere to kind of go. So as much as I was like having the best time ever, I was like in my late 20s and I was like, if I don't do something different, I'll stay here forever and I'll be too old to, switch to getting another job. Now that I'm in my 30s, I know that it's not too late to switch to get a new job. But at the time, I felt a lot of pressure that if I don't get out of here. I'm gonna stay here forever because it's so cushy. Like having such a cushy lifestyle and a great time. So that was kind of the key thing. Being in Busan for 2 years was like the best ever, and I miss it all the time. But I also realized that there was just no, I wouldn't be happy in the long term if I was there. I can't work the same job all the time without any growth as a person, for that long without getting depressed. So I knew I had to leave, make a change.
Okay. So you're worried about getting depressed, and you know you have to make a change. What happens next?
So the kind of logical next step for a Hagwon teacher like myself, who has no TOEFL, no teaching degree, would be to try to get one of those things. But before I did that, I started applying for international school jobs. And I was lucky enough to get one in Singapore at the Korean International School in Singapore, which for whatever reason didn't seem to mind that I didn't have a teaching degree and didn't have a TOEFL or anything like that. But it was for me a way to get my foot in the door at an international school teaching like a proper curriculum, not just being an after school academy teacher, not just an SAT teacher, but being a proper English teacher teaching English literature. So I decided to take that job and go forward with that.
So you've been, I think when we first started speaking, you mentioned that, I'd do maybe a year in a Hagwon and then move on. Like, how did you decide, hey, I'm going to stay? Was it just as using your words, the cushiness of the job? And then you were like, okay, I want to keep going, or was there something else?
I think for me, living in Korea, there's something very like stimulating about it that really appeals to me and the way my brain works. Like every day is different. Sometimes there's a new store on my own street that wasn't there 2 days ago. Um, your friends, we all have lots of free time. We can go out and do, interesting museum visits or go to just have a picnic or go, rafting down a river, which may or may not have been allowed. um, or, going to the beach and just getting a pension and sleeping on the floor. There are just so many things to do. And when I thought about moving back to the States, like it, it didn't appeal to me. Like I have to get health insurance. I have to get a job that's not going to pay very much. I have to get a car, all these things. Um, that was always like such a big negative compared to the life in Korea where, you really get to do anything you want in your free time. So I think the sort of immature side of me was like, well, Korea is fun, Asia's fun. I don't want to leave. I want to stay here. And that's kind of the main reason why I stayed. But at the same time, like I felt professionally unfulfilled in Korea as a Hagwon teacher. So I knew I had to kind of move into a different direction at the end of the day.
Right. And so you go to Singapore, uh, doing international school teaching. But then how do you get from there to starting running your own business? what what happens in between?
Singapore is very different from Korea in terms of what kind of jobs expats can get. So I was a teacher, but didn't mean I couldn't be something else. Whereas in Korea, if you're really restricted to certain visas. Like there's English teaching visa, there's the international school teaching visa, there's the entertainer visa, there's professional visas, things like that. Korea or Singapore has more of a open-ended professional visa. So if the company qualifies to hire someone, they can. So while I was at the international school, I was really struggling because I was coming from this background where I had all the curriculum set for me. And in this international school, there's no curriculum for me whatsoever. So I was really struggling to create curriculum. My boss wasn't super involved. My coworkers were kind of mean. So the whole thing was just really challenging. And a recruiter reached out to me on LinkedIn who had seen my SAT experience, who was recruiting for a company that did test prep and college admissions counseling. And I knew about college admissions counseling, as a job since high school. And I really wanted to get into that field because as much as I love high schoolers and working with them, I'm so bad at managing a classroom. I love talking to kids. I love mentoring them. I love hearing everything they're thinking. I can't handle so many of them in a room trying to like get them to be quiet and work together. So at that point at the international school, I was like, I'm either going to have to go to grad school and become a trained teacher so that I can do this in a way that makes me happy, that I know I'm doing my best in the classroom, or I can do something else. And just around that time, I got recruited to go work at this other company. It was a startup. There are a lot of startups in Singapore that you can work at. You don't get paid very much, but it's a really good way to get your foot in the door to the next one and the next one. And so from there, the startup I was at, after 5 months of me being there, it closed. I was unemployed for a couple months. And then I started working at another college startup, which got bought by another one and then another one. So I ended up with about 3 or 4 years of experience at these different college admissions counseling firms. And when I was there, I had learned so much. I absolutely loved it. And I had experience both in the business and the marketing, the business development side, the sales side. I had a hand in everything because it was a startup. But at the same time, I could see that I could do this independently and make more money. And by the time I quit, I was in a situation where I felt like our bosses weren't listening to us. I felt like the company was not doing super well. And the very first firm that I had worked at when I first got recruited, um, the people I had worked with there, my friends, had taken the brand and changed it from the Keys Academy to the Keys Admissions. But they all wanted to stop doing college admissions counseling, much like lots of teachers who in Korea who want to move on to something else. They were like, we don't want to do counseling anymore. We'd like to move on. So I worked out a deal with them where I bought over the brand and the company over a 3-year period, so that I could just kind of take over an existing company in Singapore. And that was the way I was able to sort of start a business without going through the stress of completely starting from scratch, which made it much, much easier than anything else.
So for those of us who come from a very different academic system, what is an admissions counseling company? What do they do?
In America, the college system is the admissions process is based on not just your grades, but your extracurriculars, your teachers' letters of recommendation, how much effort you put into things both in and outside of school, and your SAT score. And then all of that is capped off by a lot of essays and a resume, all of these special essays you have to write for every single university you apply to. So there's a market for admission consultants because many high schools have counselors in school who have really big caseloads. And parents, especially the parents that I work with, they're very nervous and they want their kid to be um, really supported throughout the whole process. And I'm basically their personal college counselor. So I help them figure out, what are they interested in doing outside of school? What do they want to do more of? What do they want to try? What summer camp should they do? What jobs should they potentially get? I help them explore all their interests. And then when it comes down to picking schools, we look at those together. So, what's the right fit university for you? This one's really tiny. This one's really big. This one's a really big STEM focus. This one is all women. We come up with a list together. And then I help them brainstorm their essays and help them edit their essays, is a long, high stakes process for a lot of my kids. So I kind of hold their hand for about 2 years to the whole admissions process.
So I think I'm starting to understand it. So do the parents of the candidates or the candidates themselves, do they kind of specify to you their general area of focus? Like they want to get into a US college or they want to go to a university in Australia and they want to study this kind of topic? Who does what? Is the parents in charge? Are the candidates themselves in charge? Who picks the region? All of those kind of things. How does it work for this system work?
So usually the family has an idea of the regions when they come in because there's a huge difference between going to the UK or going to the US for college, just in terms of cost, but also in terms of the way the university systems are structured. Um, I do have families coming in, hoping for highly selective colleges, and I support them. But a big part of my job is sort of managing expectations, but also pushing kids when they need to be pushed. But and also really a lot of it is keeping everyone's anxiety down. This is a process. This isn't necessarily a race. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Um, there is no emergencies in college counseling. We can get all of this work done and do it in a thoughtful way that supports the student without, you know, too much stress. Because the main thing that a lot of my students have to deal with is the competition within their own high schools. all know where each other is applying. They all know each other is getting on their, exams, and it's really, really stressful. So I see my job as kind of making sure that I can help everyone stay calm throughout the whole process, both parents and kids. And if they're A student or a B student or a C student, I can make sure that they get into a college that's good for them, or at least supportive for them no matter what. And that's sort of what I aim to do with my kids.
And you focus purely on Korean families.
Most of my students are international students. So a lot of them are based in Singapore, some Korea, but I also have Pakistan, Philippines, Indonesia. The big thing that unites all of them is they're usually at an English language, like fully English international school, often doing the IB program, but sometimes, AP or something else. And they all want to go abroad for university.
So as an, you've told me a bit more about it, and I feel like I'm getting it. But like as an admissions consultant, yourself, and you're running your own business now, how do you differentiate yourself from others in the market? Like I imagine that's quite hard. If you, as you said, it's quite a calm, no emergencies process.
A lot of people will market themselves as, "I'll get your kid into Harvard," or "We have a team of advisors that's gonna all work together to get your kid into Stanford." My approach is that, I take a very small number of students per year. I focus on international families. I understand what they're going through. I also work with a lot of neurodiverse students and neurodiverse families. So if students have ADHD or are on autism spectrum or have dyslexia, I work with a lot of kids in that regard. So I understand what they're looking for, and I also know how to work with them in a way that makes it like effective for them. Um, and on top of that, I'm one of the few foreigners in Korea doing this job. Almost everyone else is either local Korean or Korean American. Not that they're not foreigners, but I'm the only one who's not Korean or Korean American doing this job in Korea, as far as I can tell.
One thing I'd like to know about is the human side of this because, it's not like a Hagwon. It's not like, you have a curriculum and here's what you got to do every day. You're working, with the students. You're like a mentor to them, from what I gather. Um, do you have any experiences without naming names, without like saying anything? Like, is there any experiences where you're really proud, like students, where you're really proud of the work that you guys did together, that you feel comfortable sharing?
I occasionally get to work with students pro bono. And I met this incredible student a few years ago um, who reached out to me through a connection. She was based in India and she had like amazing scores, but she had done all of these things outside of school just on her own, like just because she wanted to. She was doing research projects. She was doing an online program. She was teaching like kids in a village where she came from about like different careers other than farming and being a homemaker. Um, and she didn't even know that all the things that she was doing was like the way you kind of get to an American college. She sort of found that out later on. And she had applied and hadn't gotten in. And then the second time she was like, okay, I'm going to try to find someone to help me. So I helped her pro bono. And I mean, she worked so hard. She wrote a million essays. She's a fantastic writer. Her family didn't really support her in this. So that was interesting. Um, Although I think they came around at the end of the day. It was more her extended family that didn't support it. And she got into Amherst full ride. Like they paid for her flights, they paid for her housing, they paid for everything. And she's graduating this year with like a job in the US. She spent her whole time in like in school doing amazing research projects. She had an internship in Africa, I think it was Ghana. And then in Cambridge, she studied abroad. Like she had incredible opportunities in it. And I'm just so like, proud that I was able to help her. Like, she's such a genius, like, she totally deserved it, and she would have gotten in there without my help, but, like, being able to support someone like that, like, kind of achieving the American dream was really, really special for me.
That's really cool. I mean, it must be really rewarding for you to have been a part of it. Uh, There's just so many people that if they know how to access the opportunity, or they know the right form to submit, or they know the right
Yeah.
place to submit it, they might be able to make their kind of dream happen. That must be really cool to be a part of.
Yeah, that's a really big topic in the community, or like the industry that I'm in, is access, because all of us like tend to be helping like kind of wealthier families like through this process. But all students in the United States who are applying to college like really do need guidance and need access to like the information about how to apply, where to apply, how much money they can get, like the financial aid situation. That and they just don't know. And so there's in the international space, because of the way financial aid works in the US, there's almost no chance for me to do pro bono work. So when I have the chance, I'm really excited to be able to help and know that like, you know, I'm really making a bigger impact on that student.
So for the Korean families that you work with and candidates that you work with, what's the reason that they are looking to study abroad?
Pretty similar to why most of my international families want to study abroad. There's a lot of prestige in going overseas for your education. Depending on the country they come from, like UK, US, Canadian universities are considered as more prestigious than their local universities. In Singapore, families will their local schools are pretty good and they're high on the Times World ranking. So often they'll come to me and they'll say, "We'll only apply to schools that are above the National University of Singapore on this ranking," um, which frustrates me just because you have such a different experience, like studying abroad versus staying in Singapore. But if that's what they want, then I make it clear to them what the deal is, and we're all happy. Korea is interesting because there's kind of two sets of people that end up going abroad. One is people, who went to, top private schools or international schools, and for the same reason they want to go to a prestigious school overseas. Part of that is because when you go to an international school, it's very difficult to get into a Korean like Sky University, although a lot of them still try for those as well. Um, and then for the students who don't get into Sky schools or schools that are in Seoul, a lot of families, for them, it's preferable to send your students somewhere else overseas than to go to a school that's not considered as strong within Korea, maybe a school that's not in Seoul or a school that's not highly ranked. So that is an interesting like quirk to the Korean system. Is like even though they have a lot of great universities, they've actually been filling some of those like lower tier, quote unquote, lower tier universities with international students coming from other countries because local students don't want to go there or would rather go overseas.
That seems like a bit of a blip. Like, so if I'm understanding you correctly, the preference would be to go to a university outside of Korea over one that isn't in Seoul, being Sky, Seoul National, Korea Uni, and Yonsei.
I think the ranking generally is number one choice is a Sky school. Number two choice is like an Ivy League name brand US college. Number three is a school in Seoul. Then after that, it's any school overseas, and then after that, it's like a school in the boonies in Korea. That's from what I understand, that's the general priority for a lot of families if they can afford to go abroad.
All right, so you've had a lot of experience living abroad, living in Korea and Singapore and back in Korea again, and a lot of experiences with in the education field, both as a teacher and a consultant and a business owner. To all the folks out there who are listening and are dreaming of coming to Korea, and maybe getting their own start here teaching English, what advice would you give them?
So I have a lot of hot takes here, and you can put them in any order you want. But here are some of my takeaways. Here are some of my hot takes. I think honestly, it's a great experience, but you really need to know what your goal is when you're coming to teach in Korea as an English teacher. You have to think about how old you are and you have to think about what you're aiming for in life. I think if you're under 30 and you come and you know you're coming for 2 or 3 years, I I have a certain like set of advice. And if you're older and looking for a lot more long-term experience, I have a different set of advice for that. So if you're younger and your goal is, okay, I want to go to law school later, or I want to go, I'm not sure what I want to do, but I'll go to grad school at some point. you can come to Korea, you can have an incredible time, you can learn so much, you can save a lot of money. It's like very affordable cost of living. And if you're diligent and you're not like getting drunk constantly, you can really put a lot of money away. Um, the other thing is that when you're a Hagwon teacher, like I said, I was working from 1 to 8, but that meant I had all this other time, like in the day, to do things. And at the time, I was like young, not knowing what I was doing. But if I had put that time into like an online master's degree, like any kind of online course, I think maybe because I was only 22, but I think if you're coming here, maybe after 25, you should put that extra time into studying something. You can get an online teaching degree that will be very handy for you in terms of career progression later on. You can get an online master's in something you're passionate about. I know I've been advertised on podcasts to do a master's in accounting online from University of Virginia. There are so many things that you can study online and part time during the week that I think if you can like make the time for that, you could actually be incredibly productive during your time here in Korea. If your goal, however, is to stay here and live here long term, you have to be aware that it's very, very difficult. So the people I know who stayed long term either married Koreans or are Korean American or Korean, Canadian themselves. They have a different visa and are able to stay longer. Um, or they became incredibly fluent in Korean and were able to get a special visa. But all of those things still doesn't guarantee that you can get a job in the Korean market because many companies they like feel nervous about hiring a foreigner. Even if they do speak Korean, they get kind of nervous. So, the government is promoting it right now. I think the society, like at least is trying to have more international people in these jobs, but the companies themselves are worried about it. And so they just aren't making offers. So your choices at the end of the day become, be an international school teacher, be highly educated in STEM and get a STEM job, but you still need to know Korean for that. Or be like 55 and an expat manager coming in to work at, Coupang or Amazon or or one of the big shipping companies. I think just knowing that ahead of time is good because you don't want to like kind of think you'll just move up, naturally on the career ladder here because you can't. Um, so
Mm.
coming here, you should really think about it as a temporary thing or a X period of time that will get you to your next step, but it's not going to naturally become like a long-term career as a Hagwon teacher.
So I just need to wait until I'm 55 and then be a coupon man.
Well, no, yeah, well, yeah, and then you should also become a manager outside of Korea, and then be brought in on an expat package, and then your life is going to be
Ah,
perfect.
okay, okay, okay.
Yeah, that's what
All
you
right.
want. So
I just
come,
gotta wait.
yeah, come back in
Yeah,
like 30
just
years.
a few decades and then
Yeah,
I'm set.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Not that long, unfortunately. Anyways,
But if you
so
are,
regardless.
yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Okay, fine. I'll go ahead. Okay. No, so regardless of the whether you're here short term or long term, and you figured this out beforehand, what like universal advice would you give to everybody for their first month?
I would say yes to everything. I think that's advice that has served me in a few situations, but it's really the best way to make friends. And just try everything. So if your coworker asks you out to lunch, say yes. If some random foreigner you meet asks you to come to their open mic night, say yes. I think one of the best things about being an expat that I don't know why it isn't talked about enough, but for me, like the best thing about being an expat is that because everyone is leaving all the time. Some people think that's like the worst thing about being an expat, but for me, that's the best because if everyone is leaving, everyone is always looking for new friends. So no matter what, people are always open to inviting you to do stuff, like asking you to hang out, integrating you into their circle of friends. I find it incredibly easy to make friends like here and in Singapore and in everywhere else I've lived because there isn't this sense of, oh, I have my friends, I don't need any more new ones. So as long as you're open-minded and you're willing to say yes to lots of different people, you'll find your group of people after a couple months and you can sort of settle down. but just say yes to everything at the beginning and don't be closed off to any opportunity or any strange offer. But just watch out for the cults.
So you've preempted me. What things would you advise people to be wary of? Cults being number one.
I think the cults are only operating on certain areas, so you know, be wary of if you're in a tourist situation, a tourist area. If someone comes up to you and wants you to come to church with them, try to extricate yourself from that situation. Things to be wary of, I would say, um, one is that I've had a lot of my younger friends talk about feeling very unsafe here or like just like talk about things that are unsafe in Korea. But Korea is one of the safest countries in the world. And I think if you are just aware of your surroundings, you'll be absolutely fine. Just like any major city, you shouldn't be walking around with your headphones at night necessarily, although you can because there's always people around. You shouldn't go places by yourself or with strangers, but that's kind of common sense. I think just there are a lot of people who will try to scare you about Korea and the like, levels of safety here, and I think take that with a grain of salt.
No, something you said earlier that I think is really true, but I think really fits this part of our conversation is like, especially if you're a teacher, is like know that you can stand up for yourself. Like you might think you're powerless, so that you can't. If something's like you're not getting paid according to the schedule, like the contract, these kinds of things. You might think, oh, right, like I'm on this visa, I'm very vulnerable, but like you can fight for yourself, and it'll work most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, not only can you fight for yourself, but there's like a whole labor board you can go to. Even if you know, were to lose your visa, you can come back in on a tourist visa and try to fix things. Like it's scary, definitely, but it's not. Don't let anyone hold you hostage, like in a bad situation. I think there are resources to kind of help you if you're in that situation, and expats will help each other as well. I would say, honestly, the biggest thing to be wary of is like it is so fun when you're here for the first couple of years. Like you have so much free time, you're doing so much awesome stuff. The biggest thing to be wary of is like don't like forget your goals, like what you're here for. If you're planning to save money, or if you're planning to study for the LSAT, like whatever it is, like don't lose sight of that. Um, and then n- be wary of the people who have been here for too long, who talk a lot of shit about Korea. Those people have been here too long and need to leave. So, like, like I think if you Korea is interesting because you have to strike a balance between, um, going with the flow with the way the culture is, but also like keeping your own principles. So if you're being mistreated at work, you could say to yourself, "Well, that's the Korean way. Like I shouldn't complain." But you don't have to do that, you know. And at the same time, if you're being asked to do something at work that, like let's say stay an extra half an hour to help with something, you don't need to be the person who says, "Oh, well, that's not in my contract, so I'm not staying later." Like, because that's not nice, like within the culture either. Like, you should try to give people extra time when they need it. So I would say, finding that balance is important between like your expectations and their expectations.
That definitely is an admissions advisor answer. Keep sight of your goals. During the 2 years you're here, keep sight of your goals, manage your time, all of those, gather those extracurriculars. Yeah,
I mean, I say
that
that as
seems
someone
fair.
who didn't do that herself, right? I didn't know I want to be honest. I didn't know what I was doing, and I've ended up with a business and very happy in my career. But I look back on it and I'm like, oh man, I had all this free time. I could have learned Korean, and I didn't. Like, so
So you've been here a while now. Would it be right to say that you consider Korea home?
Korea is my favorite country that I've ever lived in. So, and I want to stay forever if I can. So I would say, yeah, it's home. Um, where I think my relationship to the word home has sort of shifted. Like I don't know what I would consider home other than like the home I grew up in. But I feel super comfortable and happy in Korea, but I'm really comfortable and happy with my family and my friends too. I'm not super hung up on like what's home and what's not home. I will just say Korea is my favorite place and I want to live here forever.
So you're living here in Korea at the moment. Why did you come back here from Singapore?
So I was in Singapore for about 8 years. I think Singapore is a great place to kind of grow your career. Everyone speaks English. There's a ton of entrepreneurship. Like it's a small city, so there's a lot of access to people doing startups and all kinds of like innovation. But it's also like being a small city. It's very specific in how the expat community works. When I first went there, I had massive culture shock because one of the nice things about living in Korea as a teacher is like almost everyone else you meet is also a teacher. So when you meet people, you don't say, "Oh, hey, what do?" You just talk about other things. You talk about life, you talk about what you're interested in. That's it. And when I moved to Singapore, people would ask me what I did. I'd say I was a teacher, and they'd be like, "Oh my gosh, I've never met a teacher before. How interesting." And they were all in consulting and banking and finance and all and things like that. So it was a really big culture shock moving to kind of that kind of situation where people have a ridiculous amount of money. People are very, very focused on their careers, which is a very different expat vibe. So it was a phenomenal place to grow my career, grow my business. After COVID, I just really missed like the energy and the like seasons and just like the lifestyle in Korea in comparison. Singapore is so small and it's a great place to raise kids. It's a great place to raise your family, but that's not what I was planning to do. So I realized, 8 years had gone by very quickly in Singapore. And same kind of thing. If I don't leave, I'm never going to leave. So luckily I was able to find a way to come back to my favorite place and hopefully stay a really long time.
So, for someone listening on their commute thinking, you know, the same thing you did at one point, should I actually do this and move to Korea? What's one hard truth and one encouragement you'd leave them with?
I think the hard truth is that Korea is kind of a land of temptation in a lot of ways. Like you can, especially as a foreigner, you can kind of do anything and no one no one will know. Like so that can lead to people, like doing bad behavior or like getting into bad habits or just kind of like being lazy or not fulfilling their potential. Um and that can be a big problem. But the encouragement is I think if you come here open minded and excited and like ready to learn a lot and change and meet lots of people, it really is like a life changing experience. You can have tons of opportunities to travel, to learn, to meet people from every country and honestly just meet like amazing Korean people and make great connections like within Korea itself. Um I absolutely love it. I tell everyone to visit. I think it's definitely worth coming for a year or two if you want to make a change or if you want to save money or if you want to just do something different before you go back to the real world, quote unquote. Um, it's a great choice. It's a great safe place to live.
So that seems like a great place to end. Korea's a great place to come and visit and perhaps stay, teach some English, and maybe start a business or grow your life here. Lauren, it's been awesome. Thanks so much for coming and joining us.
Thank you, Lauren. It was a pleasure having you on the pod.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great chatting with you.